Thank you. Our next speaker, reader, is Bruce Neuburger. Does anyone know Bruce Neuburger here? Woo, Bruce! Bruce is a retired teacher, author of 2 books, Lettuce Wars and Postcards to Hitler, A German Jew's Defiance in a Time of Terror. He's also authored articles on immigration, racial justice, and the Palestine-Israel conflict in Counterpunch and other venues. And he is a force here at the church in making moments like this and our witness events possible again and again and again. So with much gratitude and joy, we welcome you to the podium.
Thank you, Vanessa. A lot to live up to here. You've had a little bit of laughter today. I'm going to bring you into a different emotion. It's all too obvious that fascism relies on hatred and division. MAGA fascists focused on immigrants and migrants to direct their divisive hatred. I worked for 10 years in the fields among those being criminalized and demonized. So if you detect a little bit of anger in this piece I'm about to read you called On Migration, you'll know why. Homo sapiens have been migrating for at least 70,000 years. We are a migratory species, more migratory than our Neanderthal or Denisovan cousins, who, as far as we can tell, never made it to the American continent or Australia, let alone Polynesia, Tobago, the Aleutian Islands, or Oahu. We are adept at moving. Nearly every ecological niche, from the Amazon basin to the Highland glaciers and the Arctic tundra, were settled by our migrant ancestors. They became Germans and Chinese and Tongans, Maoris, Aboriginals, Tasmanians, Guarani, Quechua, Koreans, Koryaks, Burmese, and 1,000 other peoples. Whether 40,000 years ago or 40 months ago, it's all about migration. Those who migrated to the European continent from Africa, those tens of thousands of years ago, themselves became migrants in the modern era. Europeans, beginning with the Spanish and Portuguese, later the French, the Belgians, the Brits, the Dutch, left their regions to travel, but they weren't called migrants. They were called discoverers, adventurers, buccaneers, seafarers, conquerors, investors, merchants, settlers, and pioneers. They spread across the globe where no borders existed. They never asked permission, nor had to. They discovered, so it is said, but never invaded. They expropriated, but never stole. They claimed land that had henceforth been the birthright of common humanity and made it their private property, invoking the doctrine of discovery bestowed on them by feudal religious lords called popes. And so began the era of colonialism. They took the land, the resources, the gold, the silver, any metal with a monetary value, and they took the people in chains and transformed them into commodities and sold them as well. Everything became a commodity, and the lands they explored or wandered seized and settled. Such was the glory of the rosy dawn of capitalism. In the 527 years since European migrants began to colonize the planet, they took 110,000 tons of silver and 15 million shackled bodies and left no IOUs. The $262 trillion worth of wealth in current dollars they plucked and repatriated was a tidy sum to fund their industries, build their militaries, construct their monuments and universities, palaces and towers, and endow the scholars and scribes who embellished their heroism and glorified their wealth while ignoring its source. By the 1880s, these most flourishing nations and their prodigal offspring, America, controlled 80% of the world's financial wealth, made from coerced and free labor and products of the earth transformed by capitalist alchemy into pounds and lira, pesos and francs, rubles and marks and dollars. Amassed were riches beyond anything a fable could conceive of at one end of the world, while monumental poverty beyond description gathered at the other. As one historian noted wryly, Europe did not develop the colonies developed Europe. When religious justification for this mendacious thievery could no longer serve as an acceptable defense, they invented others. They took note of skin color, hair texture, eye shape, lip and nose contours, language and cultural variations, and invented something they called race to sort out those to elevate and those to debase. They drew demarcations called borders and defined those in and those out, not only by their national differences, but by their human value as well. Prejudice dressed itself in legal language, and laws enforced the prejudice. A vocabulary emerged to brand each division with an appropriate label. It was the explorer versus the savage, the conqueror versus the barbarian, the civilizer versus the brutes. And so that today we have businessmen versus aliens, retirees versus illegals, and expats versus wetbacks. Each year, $3 trillion migrates silently and invisibly from the poorer countries to the wealthier ones. It does so without ever being stopped by an agent in a green uniform or a barbed wire barrier, but slips quietly into banks and vaults in the marbled edifices of empire. Not so the migrants who follow in the wake of that fleeing wealth, desperate to earn a few pesos, quetzales, lempiras, cordovas, gordas, soles, or reales to augment the diminished sustenance of their battered lands. It is they who cross the blistering deserts, wade the swift currents of rivers, sit for weeks in muddy encampments, hoping for a call, only to endure the indignities of a uniformed agent yelling, "Levántate, perros!" It's the modern-day migrant that must move when their homelands have become hells on earth by plunder and climate catastrophe and other byproducts of this monstrous organism we call the free enterprise. What do Nicaragua, Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, Vietnam, Lebanon, Haiti, Panama, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines have in common? They have all had their borders violated by U.S. troops sent to establish the order of proper commercial relations or restore it when the economic plunder produced political upheaval. Those armies never asked permission to cross, never waited their turn to enter, never filled out an asylum application, never were made to sleep on the bare floor of a chilled room, never hired a lawyer, never had to remain hidden, never feared being detained, never languished in a detention center, never rode in the back of a pickup truck under a load of dirty rags, never were handcuffed and thrown to the back of an immigration van, were never chased through the fields, never thrown into a ditch to drown or hid in a safe house fearing rape, never beaten by thieves, never suffocated in the back of a big rig. Those troops, at times referred to by the ungratefully invaded as Yankees, secured the tyrants and corporate plunders or slaughtered the rebels who dared rise against them, but they were always, always, always the defenders of our freedom. During World War II, several million Mexican migrants came north, contracted to work in the U.S. fields and railroad yards. They were not referred to as human beings, but rather as braceros, brazos, for the arms they used to sow and harvest the crops. The braceros made possible the U.S. victory in that world war by supplying a nation with food, but there have never been any bracero anniversaries complete with presidential proclamations lauding their heroism, no ticker tape parades organized by a grateful nation thanking them for their service, no wreaths laid by the tombs of those who died from their toil and mistreatment, no. If the bracero was spoken of at all, it was to vilify them for daring to stay within the U.S. borders to become illegals. Woody Guthrie sang about how these workers were chased like outlaws, like rustlers, like thieves, if they dared to leave at the end of their contracts, and then were only mentioned in the news when their lifeless bodies were recovered and sent across the border as deportees. It is said that since 2008, 22.5 million people have fled their homes seeking respite from climate disasters. If all the people forced to leave their homelands were brought together as a nation, it would be the fourth largest on earth. And this is not from some uncontrollable disaster of nature, but rather because of a man-made disaster caused by, and let's not be afraid to call it by its name, capitalism, imperialism. This is a system that turns the sacred into something crass, embraced if profitable, discarded if not, that hurls nations against each other in a frenzied search for competitive advantage or lethal edge, that uses and abuses immigrants as cheap labor and toxic propaganda. Can this obsolete enterprise that lies at the bottom of all this misery be brought to a merciful end, so that the wealth humanity has created with its collective ingenuity might benefit those who fashioned it with their efforts and skill? That is, humanity as a whole. So that Guatemalans, Hondurans, Haitians, Congolese, Cambodians, Cubans, Venezuelans, Mexicans, Salvadorans, Colombians, Ukrainians, Russians, Italians, Turks, Moroccans, Palestinians, Chileans, Timorese, Americans, Laotians, Latvians, Bolivians, Bengalese, and all the other variations of our migratory or settled kin might find a place to live and prosper in their own parts of our beautiful but abused planet, to enjoy the fruits of that which we have always produced together. Yes, wealth has always been a cooperative and collective enterprise of our wandering, migrating, hopeful, wondering, quarreling, yet cooperative species we call Homo sapiens. Might that cooperative reality become the foundation of organized political structures, as revolutionaries like Avakian advocate, so that those who may wander or migrate, or may not, yet may find peace and prosperity in a sustainable land where we can cherish and appreciate each other in this world, which, in the words of Carl Sagan, is the only home we've ever known.